name is Edward Serrata. I'm a documentary photographer. And between 1985 and 2000, I documented Jewish life in Central and Eastern Europe, in places like Romania, in Sarajevo during the Bosnian War, and in places like Ukraine. But one story I returned to over and over again was the story of Jews in Germany. Not just Jews living in Germany, but how Germans went to Israel to work in Jewish old age homes, how Russian Jews moved to Germany, and how Germans related to their Jewish history. But one story I return to over and over again in my mind is the story in September 1995, more than 20 years ago, when I traveled to the Mosel River Valley to be with 7 elderly Jews who returned mostly for the first time in their lives since 1938. They'd grown up here, they lived here, and they thought this was their home, until it wasn't. They were Gerda Gardner and her cousin Erna Dorn, Fritz Bender and Lee Kahn. There was Ernst Kahn and his wife Thea, and it seemed that everything centered around the oldest person in the group, Walter Kahn. The 7 elderly Jews and their families stayed in a lovely old pension in the village of Alf, Haus Waldfrieden, which was where they had spent their time as youngsters. And every morning, while the day was starting and the pension was coming to life, Walter Kahn would sit in the breakfast room and tell me stories about his family, about the Sondheimers and the Kahns. One grandfather, Adam Sondheimer, had fought in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 and led the Veterans Parade through Bulai every year after that. Adam's daughter, Emma, married Julius Kahn, a cattle dealer, and trading in cattle in rural Germany is something Jews did quite a lot of. Emma and Julius opened a butcher shop in Bulai, and their 3 boys were born there, Max, Walter, and Ernst, and the family lived upstairs. Julius, like his father-in-law Adam, fought for Germany, this time in the First World War, but died of influenza at war's end. There never were very many Jews here, maybe about 100 or so in Alf, Bulai, and Cell. So the question was, how did one stay Jewish in such tiny communities? Well, Erna and Walter spoke very warmly of Mr. Kornfeld, a Hungarian Jew who lived in the region, and he had a rowboat. And he would row up and down the Mosel, stay with each family for a while, teaching Hebrew lessons, holidays, and bar mitzvah lessons, and then get back into his rowboat and go on to the next family. Erna grew up in Bad Bertrich, where her father had a dry goods store, but he also died in the great influenza epidemic, and Erna, her 2 brothers, and her mother ran the store themselves. They were the only Jews in town. And her cousin Gerda grew up in Alf, not far away, with her family. Now, Gerda had never been back to Germany, so at her request, I drove her to Alf, where she stood in front of her old house and said, "Oh my, well, they've certainly done a nice job with it." And right away, old neighbors came out. And while Gerda chatted with them very nicely, she later told me, "You know, if my older brother Max hadn't sent our money out before the war, my mother would never have left, and she told me that. And neither would I. So I wouldn't be here today, would I, having this nice conversation with my nice neighbors." Later, we met Walter, Ernst, Erna, and the others in the synagogue in Wittlich. No Jews go here now. It's been turned into a museum. Gerda took it all in and was overwhelmed. "Oh, it's all very nice," she said. And as if to answer her own question, she said, "Would I come back here?" No, I wouldn't. Erna stood before a memorial plaque and pointed to a name.
My mother got me out of Germany just in time, she said quietly. But because she was almost blind, the Americans wouldn't give her a visa, and my mother was taken away to Theresienstadt. The town of Cochem is almost impossibly beautiful and climbs from the Mosel itself up to the steep hillside. And our group visited the Cochem Gymnasium. Erna and Gerda sat before 20 students and told of their school days and what it was like when their friends all abandoned them. One student asked, "That's awful. How did you feel? I mean, did you feel German or did you feel Jewish?" Erna looked surprised. "Why, we were German, of course. Jewish was our religion. German is what we were." Then, as if the injustices deep inside her needed to come out, Erna said, "We couldn't go to movies. We couldn't go to the park. We couldn't have a radio, and we had to shop at certain times. And I was the only Jewish girl in our town, so believe me," and she sighed, "I was about as lonely as you could get." One student asked Erna, "Do you hate Germany?" "Hate?" Erna repeated the word. "No, I don't hate Germany, but my mother was murdered by Germans." Gerda wanted to say something, paused, and then said, "You see, we lost our homes. We lost our childhood." The word cemetery in Yiddish is Beis Olam, the home of the world. And on the final day of their visit to the Mosel, there was a ceremony for them in the Jewish cemetery of Bulai, which served Alf, Tzel, and Bulai. The grass had been mowed, the graves cleaned. Walter sat with his old friend Ernest Statfeld, and Ernest's family had purchased the Kahn's family home when they sold it and remained good friends and in touch ever since. Ernst Kahn said to me while looking at Walter and Erna, "You know, I wonder if Erna knew I was doing her brother's homework for him back then. Well, I guess there's no reason to tell her now." The young came, and so did those who remembered Kahns from the 1930s. Erna went from grave to grave. Then she found her father's grave, which she had not seen in 60 years. She took a twig from a nearby tree and she brushed it off and left 2 stones, one for her, one for her brother. "My mother doesn't have a grave," she said. Then there was Marie. Back in the day, Marie was a social outcast and was looked on by just about everyone in Bulai, but not by Walter and Ernst's mother, Emma Kahn. And when everyone else had abandoned the Kahn family in the 1930s, Marie came every evening to help around the house. Marie had had a stroke and walked with difficulty, but every year she found herself in Florida. Walter and Ernst pooled their resources to bring her to Boca Raton to visit them. They never abandoned her either. Then a cantor from Frankfurt led a memorial service. He led the prayer for the dead, for the Jews of Alf, Bulai, Tzel, and Wittlich, who had been sent away to their deaths by their neighbors. But it seemed to me it was also a memorial service for a life not lived, a world forever lost.
After the service at the cemetery, I was packing up my car at Haus Waldfrieden, and I saw Erna and Gerda taking a walk through the vineyards. And I said to Gerda, "So Gerda, still never coming back here again?" And Gerda said, Well, isn't the harvest sometime soon? And Erna told her, yes, it's in a few weeks. And Gerda said, then I'll be back for the harvest.
And they both found that very funny. Neither Gerda nor Erna returned to the Mosel. And a few weeks after he returned home to Florida, Walter Kahn, grandson of Adam Sonheimer, veteran of the Franco-Prussian War, son of Julius Kahn, holder of the Iron Cross, First Class, from the First World War, died in his home in Boca Raton, Florida, where he is buried far away from the verdant hills of the Mosel River Valley.